Thanks for listening to Fluff and Crunch, where we talk about system, setting, and story in tabletop RPGs and share our experience to hopefully help you have your best game. So I want to get right into this because in about an hour and a half, we're supposed to launch a rocket to the moon, and I'm going to be watching that. Are you going to watch that?
I might. We'll see.
Okay, you had damn well better, because I already told my younger daughter that she's a communist if she doesn't watch that thing, because when Americans do cool shit, Americans watch that on television. So it's supposed to be at 6:24 your time. I think the window opens a little bit earlier than that. It's like an hour or so window, and they're going to fling that thing up into space. You have to watch that. So I want to get right into this.
All right, well, let's do it then.
And I want you to tell our dear listeners about this wackadoo idea that you said yes to, you took part in, and we're going to talk about. And I'm going to ask you about, because I thought about this over the last couple of days, and it's weird and it's fascinating, and I'm curious. So tell us what we're going to talk about here in brief.
Yes. Right before we get into that, I will apologize for my voice. My sinuses are acting up, so I probably sound funny in the recording, but
you don't.
Okay, actually. That's really good. So this wackadoo thing that happened was, we have talked many times about my Curse of Strahd campaign that we picked up. That had
long-suffering, long-lasting Curse of Strahd campaign, which is now done.
It is now done.
But chronologically, in real time, took how long?
It was like a year and a half. And it was about 6 sessions. To give you an idea, a year and a half to get through 6 sessions.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Antonio, tell us a story-o. Tell us what we got here. So
we waited about 4 months to do so if you're doing the math there, 5 sessions took place in 14 months, and then 4 months for us to do the last session. But at the end of our 5th session, our wonderful DM/GM Cam asked if he could borrow our character sheets, which is pretty common in our play group for GMs to just keep the sheets of the characters for the campaigns they are running, so nothing gets lost because they keep it with their notes. So no one thought anything of this, and especially not me, because I have very little GMing experience, so I didn't think anything about it. And then about at the 3-month mark, I got a text from my friend, and he said, "Hey, can I borrow your monster manual that you had gotten me, a much older edition than the 5e monster manual?" And I thought nothing of it, because he runs a lot of campaigns, so sure, you can borrow this. And so we finally and then he gives it back to me. And then we finally get to, and other background, he has been commenting that he wants to collect different core books from different eras of Dungeons and Dragons. So,
which is laudable,
right.
is cool. Like, I'll interject with this, like, I still have my Holmes basic box, and I still have the white box. And I have the 3 original 1st edition AD&D core books, and I have the third edition stuff, and I have the 5th edition stuff. And it is kind of neat to, like, if you sit down sometimes just for, like, exercise sake, you look at, like, how are different things handled in different eras of the game. So that's laudable.
Yeah, and our friend Chad has almost all of the 5th edition books, and then our friend Jacob has almost all of the 4th edition books. So we had been and we had been talking and Cam had been talking about how he was going to start getting 3.5. So that was just slowly working our way back. But again, we didn't think anything of this. It's pretty standard for people to collect books from those. I've been collecting a bunch of the 2D20 books, so it's just kind of common for us to do that kind of stuff. So we sit down at this final session of Curse of Strahd, which has been based off of anyone who has seen the animated television show Castlevania. That was what it was loosely based off of, for you listeners. And we're sitting down, and we have...
Wait, your version was?
Yes.
That's what you mean?
Yeah. So...
Not the Curse of Strahd is based off
No,
Ravenloft, but I got okay. So I got you.
correct.
So yours was like story wise was like Curse of Strahd with Castlevania kind of smooshed into it.
Correct.
Okay,
So,
cool.
yeah, that's where our characters took a lot of inspiration from Castlevania. The setting and the NPCs were all from Curse of Strahd. So that's kind of how we smushed them together. So we go into the last session, which everyone knows is where you fight Strahd. I won't go much more into it because if you haven't played it, you absolutely should because it is arguably one of my favorite D&D pre-written campaigns. But we went into this fight and we had our fifth edition characters that we'd been very used to through the entire campaign. And we sat down and we're fighting Strahd, and it is a very difficult fight. And we get Strahd to what we assume is half health. Uh, I didn't really get this confirmed till after the session, but we believed, okay, we think we've done enough damage to where Strahd should be about half health. And in Castlevania, there is this thing called the Infinite Corridor, which just allows you to travel through dimensions and time and space and all this weird stuff. So our GM Cam has brought this into the game and has mentioned it multiple times and says, I need you all to make a Constitution saving throw. And we're like, okay, that's really weird for this moment, but we can do that. So we all make a Constitution saving throw, and two of us succeed and two of us fail in typical D&D party fashion. And he goes, "Wonderful. Everything around you shifts, and it no longer looks the same." And he goes, "And I have something for all of you." And he hands us which I will point out, I apologize. I said that we did 4 different things. It was 3. But he hands us 3.5 character sheets and says, congratulations, you've been thrown into the Infinite Corridor, and now you are fighting Strahd in 3.5, which is Strahd from Ravenloft 3.5, which is a very different character, a very different NPC to have to combat. And all of our stats are completely different. All of our classes are completely different because some of our classes may or may not exist at this point.
So then he took the reason why he borrowed your character was to take inspiration from your 5th edition character and build a version of that character. And I assume by depending on the class of the characters, some were more faithful to the original than others, but he took his creativity and said, all right, this is what we're going to do. And so then he hands this back to you. Now, how many of you had ever played 3.5 before, and therefore how familiar were you with the rules?
One person, and I just messed up the screen. So one person had played 3.5 before. So, and it was not the GM. So it was only so, and just to give you the classes, because this will make it more fun as we go back. We had a human fighter, and a human artificer, and a human paladin, and a human sorcerer.
Those sound like they could translate because, I mean, you have the artificer from 3.5 Eberron.
Right.
So rolling the clock back to that.
So everyone, the 3.5 was not a huge shock, but it was very different because, well, if you've seen a 3.5 character sheet and it's 3 pages versus the standard 5e of where most people are only using 2 and feats and everything else that you're trying to keep track of, it was a big shock. Armor classes.
Yeah, you make a huge jump. Like the importance of feats grows tremendously in 3.5, and class abilities become, I'd say, arguably less of a defining thing than they are in 5th edition. And I think that's a difference with a true distinction, because how you play your character and how you understand how the character works, you really have to understand those feats.
Yeah, and it was so much fun because he hands us these sheets and then goes, "Here's the player's handbook that you all can use. Good luck. You're playing now. You're playing 3.5." And we're like, "Okay, I guess the one guy who's played 3.5 is going to walk us through how to do all of this," because Jacob was the only one that had done it. So we're like, "Okay, we'll kind of figure this out. We'll make it work." And it actually worked fairly well. We figured it out fairly well because we're all relatively experienced players, so we knew how to read and look for things. And we continued the fight, and then Strahd once again hit half health. And he goes, "Congratulations, I need you to all make a Constitution saving throw once again." And we went, "Oh no, what are you doing now?" And so he hands us a D&D character sheets, which is very different from 3.5, let alone 5th edition.
He goes, you skipped the even numbered editions.
Correct. So he hands us a D&D character sheets, which means I believe I was the only character as the fighter that did not change class at this point. Everyone else, I believe, because the artificer became a thief. So the guy who was a paladin didn't meet the paladin requirements, so I think he had to do something else. And then the guy who was the sorcerer, I can't remember if that was the same or if there was a different name technically. I don't know AD&D well enough.
I don't remember. There was the first big, well, I mean, like in first edition D&D, you had a fighting man, you had an elf, you had a dwarf, you had a wizard, something like that. I don't even remember off the top of my head because it's been so bloody long. But with the AD&D PHB, the first expansion of a significant expansion of classes beyond that book was Unearthed Arcana, and I never had that book. So like Barbarian, and I forget what Cavalier was in that book. Okay, so yeah, Human Fighter makes sense.
Luckily, we were all humans. That did make it much easier because it was base. So
okay, that makes life easy. You didn't have some twit playing like the Ergonasi tiefling hybrid minotaur.
Well, and since we were basing it off Castlevania, we kind of had to be human, so it made it very easy for him to do this. But yeah, it was definitely a very different situation because then when you get your AD&D character sheet, it does not read the same at all. So
and your AD&D PHB doesn't read the same way because it doesn't have the combat rules in it. Okay, dear listeners, if you did not play first or second edition, you don't realize what a weird revelation it was when third edition came out and the entire rule set were in the PHB. People were like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. As if, I mean, and the crazy thing is, I remember a number of years ago, I went back and I was reading the PHB again, and I had forgotten that completely. And I was like, where the hell are the combat rules? Oh, they're in the DMG.
Yeah, which was
Did you have copies of these at the table?
We had a copy of the PHB, and he had a copy of the DMG on his iPad, thankfully.
That's how Gary would have wanted it. Gary didn't want the players to see the damn DMG and know the rules.
And he didn't let us. If we had questions, we had to ask. So, which made it very interesting. But in the end, it all worked out. We completed the campaign. None of our characters died, so we were all very happy with that. But the idea of taking a campaign and throwing it through the versions of Dungeons and Dragons was such a novel idea that I thought we had to bring this up on the show. I'm so glad that you decided to do it now, but it was just such a great idea for him to do, to just throw this out there and be like, okay, we're going to do this now. We're going to have fun. We didn't do all of the versions, which was very nice, or we would have been there for forever, but working our way back and kind of seeing a history of Dungeons and Dragons as we did this was a lot of fun.
So, first off, would you play either of the other versions that you played again?
If we started a campaign like from the beginning in that version, probably AD&D would be very difficult just because we're so hardwired not using that type of system. I think 3.5 would be easier. The problem is the majority of us don't have anything from those rule sets, so it would be very difficult to get invested into those. But if one of the players from that campaign came to me and said, hey, I really enjoyed playing my character in this version, would you be okay with me GMing that version of Dungeons and Dragons? I'd say absolutely. Even like whether it's a one shot, whether it's a campaign, I would definitely try it.
See, this is interesting because you got me thinking. Like I haven't run a D&D basic game in 40 years. No kidding. I have not played in over 40 years, actually. I haven't played a first edition game in over 40 years. I have played second edition D&D a handful of times. Like I think fewer than 10 sessions because once Star Frontiers came out in like 1982 or 1983, I was like, whoop, and then into Traveler and Gamma World and all that stuff. And I skipped second edition entirely. I take it back. I had the PHB only, which also means that I didn't know the full rules because I didn't have the DMG. But and I think, like I said, I played a handful of second edition sessions. It wasn't until third edition came out in I think 2000, I think it was, that I'd been playing so many other things, and I was like, maybe just a cheeseburger would be nice. You know what I mean? Like maybe I'll go, maybe I can go home, kind of thing. And a whole bunch of us who had played either together or just in our own past D&D, I reintroduced D&D to the group through third edition. But it's fascinating because I have, let me grab it, actually. I don't know if I've shown you this. Wait a minute, let me put it right in front of the camera. It's not showing. I have this this omnibus, like 150-page book, which is all the basic and expert rules. Someone got a really clean scan of the basic and expert rules of D&D, with the Errol Otis cover. That's what I have, and I got a physical copy of it. I have the thing on PDF too, and I've thought about like, because basic is, I mean, again, like you're a fighter. I mean, if you play an elf, your class is your race,
right?
Right. Dwarfs the same thing, and I've thought about like, wow, would it be kind of cool to relearn those rules and run it? I've thought the same thing about AD&D First Edition. I think it would be important. It would be really useful, like you just said, if you were to play a campaign or maybe a short arc, 5 or 6 sessions, more than 1 or 2, because some of the rules are so different that it would take a little bit of time for you to master or become proficient in them, so that everybody at the table is, functioning properly. But I wonder, like, you got me thinking, like, I wouldn't have done it in one session. I would have done it per session, and I would have chosen encounters and situations that I thought would, in some weird way or another, married well with that version of the rules. Yeah. How funky. What was his reason? What was his, did he hit his head, or what was, I mean, like, well, it's inspired. I have never thought of that before. What was his reasoning?
So Cam is by far our most out of the box thinking GM. The best puzzles I have ever had in a campaign came from him. Just to give you an idea, he is best known for his final sessions. Like anytime we play a campaign with Cam, the goal is like, we have to finish this because we have to see what the final session is going to look like. So he was our very first GM ever for D&D when we were all in college. And I didn't know this until long after we'd finished that campaign, but he'd only run 2 campaigns before. So we were like, this was a year and a half long, as in like every other week campaign, at like super long. But he just thinks outside of the box so much. So just another example, one of our players in the Strahd campaign who was also in that original campaign was Jacob Savage. There are 2 Jacobs in this group, so it makes it a little more difficult. But Cam had built up this whole time that we were going to face like these end game bosses for each of our characters, that it was going to be like a one-on-one solo fight just to make you feel epic at the end of your very first D&D campaign. And in the moment, he had Jacob Savage, whose character had been a ranger, an elven ranger, who died halfway through the campaign, and we brought him back and accidentally threw him in a discount body because we couldn't recover his elven body, so we threw him in a dragonborn body, which led to all kinds of really fun existential stuff because it's like, your lifespan was just cut drastically. So this fight, he's like, okay, you're going to fight. The person you're fighting, Mr. Ranger, is his name was Halfus, the Lord of Iron. Really heavy armor, makes archery a little more difficult. Was essentially because this guy wants to get up close, which makes ranged attacks not very good. So Cam, in his super big lead up to boss level fight, has the guy jump out of an airship to do his superhero landing, and the plastic legs on the mini break.
He dropped him and it broke.
Like literally as he like puts it down on the table and it breaks. And Jacob, Savage, goes, "That's really funny. Halfus Lord of Iron forgot how heavy iron was and broke his legs." And Cam looks at him and then looks down at the character. And then we hear a roll from behind the screen. And he looks up and he goes, "Halfus Lord of Iron forgot how heavy iron is and broke his legs." And the fight was done. Like,
you got to know the moment.
He walked outside, but like, I've never had a GM do something like that in the moment. And it's just stuff like that, where coming up with these things, spur of the moment or over long periods of a campaign to really have a plan for what the ending is going to look like. That's just kind of his thing. So when he pulled this out, we were all like, this is exactly what we were expecting from a campaign at the end
to finish the thing off.
Yeah.
That's really it's just fascinating. Like I remember a couple of years ago when I've gone through these fits and starts of system design myself, thinking about like how dramatically different, say, Gumshoe is from like a D20 game. And now the system itself is tailored to function to meet the needs of different kinds of stories. So it's really the genre of story informs how the system should function. And, you know, what if you have the character that is going to do investigatory stuff? And thus you would think maybe the system needs to be able to provide for that. But you also want like really cool tactical combat stuff. So I had even toyed with the idea of like, how could you have a system that was actually not a single system? Like depending on what you were doing, depending on the kind of activity, like combat, exploration, investigation, and interaction, maybe there'd be some kind of like a core floor, but the actual systems would be different. And you might even have, like, you would turn to different parts of your character instead of like, it's all the same. I never took it beyond that, like, degree of detail. But that would be interesting to run a campaign, maybe a whole campaign in phases. You know, if you wanted the campaign to be extra deadly at the lower levels, you'd start off with like, you run it with Shadow Dark for a few levels. And then once you want them to start like being able to, you know, kick some ass, then you maybe switch to Pathfinder, translate the characters. And then if you really want like flying castles or something like that, then you go to like, you know, I don't know, 5th edition or whatever. But that's an interesting, it's definitely a cool way to make the end memorable. And obviously then is very much in character with this character who is your GM.
It's also really fun because none of us had experience with the other versions of D&D. So we've all read the books. Like I said, all of my friends have collected different versions of the books, and they've read my 2D20 books. It's just common for us when we're hanging out with one another to go over to whoever's bookshelf it is and pull a book off the shelf and start reading. But we never thought that we would, especially now that we've graduated from college, that we would have the time to sit down and play through all of these systems. We rarely have time when we're all together. Sometimes we can get 2 or 3 of us together to play. But the fact that the 5 of us who all played in that original, not everyone who had played in that campaign was there, but all of us had been in that original 5th edition campaign, to be able to sit down and not just complete another campaign, but try out 3 different systems in one session together as a group. It was just an experience that we didn't think that we would have. So now it's another one of those stories that we can put on the shelf of things really like, cool. Here are all the different things we've done.
And you know this, okay? You know this. And I'll add to it by saying that, you know, the longer you're in this goofy hobby, and the more you have people who like we're getting together and we're really kicking in to do this, you will have those moments that are memorable, and like you and your friends, you had a great time playing this game, but you also had part of it was because you had a great time because you did this creative thing together. That's really cool, and it is memorable. I mean, I don't know, like I like, I like going for a hike and seeing a really beautiful vista. You know, it's the same kind of like life experience thing. That's just it's enjoyable and you remember it. That is so cool. That is so cool. So now you're inspiring me to come up with some wackadoo thing. Yeah, I don't know what I'm going to do with that. I got to think about it.
Yeah, and this is something I'm just going to throw out there because I know we've done this different GMs at different points, and I think I've talked to you about this, but even if you aren't sure about running entire systems, I think it is great to use different if you have like a system has multiple versions, whether that's Pathfinder or Dungeons and Dragons or Traveler or whatever it is, using monsters from other editions in the edition that you're doing just to shake things up, especially when you have not anyone in my play group is very much like this, but I have been in play groups where this is the case, where I should say my normal play group is not like this, but I've been with other groups that are where someone just has the monster manual memorized because they're that type of person. They went out and bought it and memorized it so that they could actually the GM yeah, pull in something from AD&D. Throw that at
and
your
you know
players.
what? It's not like you're going to use the same stats per
Right.
se.
Sometimes you can use the same abilities, which make it really weird.
That's what I was going to get at, is that there are some of these things, it's not just a mechanical, it's not just the numbers are different. The monster is actually qualitatively different. It functions differently. It does things like people get in arguments over level drain.
That's one of my favorites. I was in a campaign, a 5e campaign, and the GM was really ticked with one of the players constantly trying to dictate to them, this is how I think the game should be run. And so we fought a level drain monster, and he was very unhappy because he had 5e memorized, and that's not in 5e. And the other three players went, we run away. We're not fighting that. We're not going to lose levels over this. And he was like, no, I should be able to kill it. It's one of these monsters. And then he lost his first level, and then he lost another level, and then he lost another level, and we're like, you should run now. But it was kind of the comeuppance he deserved for the situation, which I'm not condoning going at your players because we all had the chance to run, but it does add that element of, oh my gosh, am I fighting 5e 4e 3.5 AD&D? Like what are we dealing with in this moment? It makes it fun.
It's a made up game, and I think that one of the great things about the made up stories in these games is that you can tackle problems that you cannot. You can't fight an army of orcs. You know, you can't be like, well, I'll go to the local park and I'll get in a fight with a bunch of middle schoolers. Like, that's not the proxy that you're going to do in place of you can't do that. And so I think part of the fun is when there's risk and there's danger. And one of the great ways to provoke that, pull that out of people, is with the unknown. And so when people, well, that's not in the rules. Well, I'm the GM. Like if you accept that I'm the game master, you have to trust me, and you have to trust me not to be a jerk. And I'm not going to be a jerk, but also like part of my job here is to have stuff come at you out of left field that challenges you and makes you go, whoa, oh my goodness, sometimes. So throwing a power at this isn't like an accounting class or like you're consulting the gaming HR department to make sure that's allowed. Pulling something from somewhere that's unexpected just makes you think, and it makes the game more fresh.
And that's and I really think it's funny when they're like, well, that's not the rules. Well, it's like, well, actually it is in Dungeons and Dragons. So it's like if you signed up to play Dungeons and Dragons, like that you like, I know you assumed it was 5e, but who knows? There are some fun things that you can do with that. But and it's not just a D&D thing. I think D&D is great to do what we did because there's so many different versions that if you want to play around with each session or different sections of a campaign being in different versions, it can cover a lot of ground because there's so much. But there is so much inspiration if you look at different versions of the same game. So, like, I just bought a bunch of the older Traveler books and adventures. That's amazing. It has so much in there that maybe it doesn't translate perfectly to the Mongoose version, but it gives me great ideas. And you really should not discount, like, hey, just because that's the old stuff doesn't mean that it's not really useful for you and can make for a really fun game, session, adventure, whatever.
Yeah, for sure. Traveler's a great example because it has a 50-year history. I mean, next year Traveler will be 50 years old, and that bench is deep. So yeah, the little black books, the LBBs, you can turn to those for all kinds of things. And the beauty of it too is that really, if you're the kind of person who wants to try, your inclination is to faithfully convert the mechanics of, they're really not that far off. But there is stuff that you found in classic Traveler of the 80s that it hasn't been reprinted yet, or it's not reflected in the current stuff. Yeah, I dig that. I mean, there have been multiple versions of Vampire the Masquerade, Vampire the Requiem, Vampire Masquerade, the new one, Vampire the Stoop, whatever, all these different versions of you could do that. I mean, the systems are different. The world canon is different. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Not only to turn to other versions of the same game for inspiration and ideas and ways to keep your players on their toes, but maybe actually even play those because they're there.
Yeah, and a lot of them are so old that you can find the online versions free. So if you don't mind using PDFs, which I know some people do and some people don't, but you can usually find them either extremely cheap or free, and you can just play.
Well, I mean, you can get an official version of the AD&D Player's Handbook, the first edition version of it, for $9.99 on drive-through. So, I mean, if you're like, I really don't, I'm not going to trust the used bookstore. I'm not going to trust that I don't want to get some mangy copy off eBay or something like that. You can definitely find that stuff, the official PDFs in good shape. It's not some shabby, pirate scan or something like that. Cool. I think that's really cool.
Yeah, it was a ton of fun, and I highly suggest it for any other GMs that are listening and want to do something crazy. It's great.
Well, it's great. I am going to now go. I have some things that I need to take care of before I park myself in front of the television and hopefully watch a moon launch for the moon, which actually means that by the time this one drops, if all goes well, they'll be back already.
Right.
Because it's supposed to be a 9 or 10 day mission. I've heard both numbers.
Yeah, that will be crazy.
Go watch.
I will go see if I can get it.
Don't be a communist. Thank you, as always, for listening to Fluff and Crunch. You can subscribe to the podcast. You can subscribe to the YouTube channel, all through the links in the show notes.